The rain came down in sheets, blurring the world outside the truck's windshield into a gray smear of regret. I was 19, barely a man, and already failing at the one thing I'd promised myself, to prove I could handle this trip alone. But here I was, stranded on a desolate stretch of Route 66 with my dad's best friend, Jack, the last person I wanted to be stuck with. We'd been driving for hours, heading to a music festival in Arizona, my first real taste of freedom after a suffocating year at home. Dad insisted Jack come along, calling it a bonding opportunity. I didn't need bonding. I needed to escape the weight of my family's expectations, the small-town whispers about who I was supposed to be. Jack was everything I wasn't: confident, rugged, the kind of guy who could fix a carburetor with a wrench and a smirk. At 42, he carried himself like he'd seen it all. And maybe he had. His presence made me feel smaller than I already did. The truck sputtered to a stop just as the storm hit, somewhere in the New Mexico desert. "Piece of junk," Jack muttered, popping the hood and stepping into the rain. I stayed inside, my phone dead, my pride bruised. The festival was slipping away, and so was my chance to figure out who I was without everyone else's voices in my head. Jack slid back into the driver's seat, soaked to the bone, his flannel clinging to his broad shoulders. "Radiator's shot," he said, wiping his face with a rag. "We're not going anywhere tonight." I groaned, slumping against the window. "Great. Just great." He glanced at me, his green eyes catching the dim glow of the dashboard. "Relax, Ethan. We'll figure it out." His voice was calm, steady, like he wasn't fazed by the universe screwing us over. I hated how much I envied that. We sat in silence, the rain drumming on the roof, each drop a reminder of how trapped I felt. I'd spent my whole life hiding my confusion, my feelings, the part of me that didn't fit into my dad's world of football games and fishing trips. Jack was Dad's friend, his fishing buddy, his beer-drinking partner. He probably thought I was just some moody kid who couldn't handle a little bad luck. But then he spoke, his voice softer than I expected. "You're not like your dad, are you?" It wasn't a question. It was a door, cracked open just enough to make my heart race. I didn't answer, but my silence said enough. Jack leaned back, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "I was like you once," he said, staring out at the rain. "Lost, angry, trying to figure out who I was when everyone else had their own ideas." My breath caught. Was he just talking? Or did he see me while I see me? The storm didn't let up, and neither did the tension in the truck. Jack suggested we set up camp in the back, under the tarp he'd rigged up to keep our gear dry. We climbed into the truck bed, spreading out sleeping bags on a mattress of blankets. It was cramped, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and Jack's cedar cologne. I lay there, staring at the tarp, my mind racing. "You ever feel like you're running from something?" I asked, surprising myself. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Jack turned his head, his face half lit by the lantern we'd hung. "All the time," he said. "But running doesn't fix it. Facing it does." I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat tightened. Instead, I changed the subject, asking about the festival, about the bands, about anything to keep the conversation away from me. Jack humored me, his deep voice filling the space with stories of his own road trips, wild nights, and mistakes he'd made. Each word pulled me in, like a current I didn't want to fight. Hours passed, the rain a steady rhythm. Jack's stories slowed, and I noticed how close we were, our sleeping bags brushing against each other. My heart pounded. Not from fear, but from something else, something I'd buried so deep I barely recognized it. "Ethan," Jack said, his voice low. "You don't have to hide." I froze. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt exposed, like he'd peeled back every layer I'd built up over the years. "I see you," he added, and those 3 words hit harder than the storm outside. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to tell him that I'd spent my life feeling wrong, that I'd never said the word gay out loud, that I was terrified of what it meant. But Jack didn't push. He just lay there, steady, present, like he'd wait as long as it took for me to find my voice. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and I finally spoke. "I don't know who I am," I whispered. "Not really." Jack turned to me then, his eyes soft but fierce. "You'll figure it out," he said, "and you don't have to do it alone." That night, under the tarp, with the desert stretching out around us, I felt something shift. It wasn't just the storm passing. It was me, starting to believe I could be more than the sum of my fears. Jack didn't fix me, he didn't try to. But he gave me something I hadn't had before, permission to be myself, whoever that was. The morning broke with a fragile kind of clarity. The desert air crisp and the sky a bruised purple. I woke to the sound of Jack tinkering with the truck, his silhouette moving against the sunrise. Last night's conversation hung between us, heavy and unspoken, like a secret we hadn't fully admitted. I climbed out of the truck bed, my joints stiff from the cold. Jack glanced over, a wrench in his hand, his face smudged with grease. "Morning," he said, his voice lighter than I expected. "Think I can get this thing running, but we'll need parts." I nodded, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Where do we get parts out here?" "There's a town about 10 miles west," he said, pointing down the empty highway. "We'll hitch a ride or walk if we have to." The idea of walking 10 miles in the desert sun made my stomach twist. But Jack's confidence was contagious. I didn't argue. We packed light, leaving most of our gear in the truck. Jack slung a backpack over his shoulder, and I followed, my sneakers kicking up dust. The road stretched endlessly, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through red rock and scrub. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt safe. Halfway to town, Jack started talking again, this time about his life before he settled in our small town. He'd been a drifter in his 20s, hopping from city to city, chasing music and trouble. "I was running from myself," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "Thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to deal with who I was." I glanced at him, my pulse quickening. "What were you running from?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kicked a pebble, watching it skitter across the road. "Same thing you are?" he finally said. "The truth." My chest tightened. I wanted to ask more, to dig into what he meant. But fear stopped me. What if I wasn't ready to hear it? What if he saw too much? Instead, I kept walking, focusing on the horizon. The town was a speck of civilization, a gas station, a diner, a few weathered houses. Jack negotiated with a mechanic who agreed to tow the truck and fix the radiator. "It'll take a day," the guy said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You boys can wait at the diner." The diner was straight out of a movie, checkered floors, vinyl booths, the smell of coffee and bacon. We slid into a booth, and Jack ordered us pancakes. I watched him across the table, his hands rough from years of work, his eyes crinkling when he smiled at the waitress. He was so at ease, so sure of himself. I envied that more than I could say. You ever think about leaving? I asked, poking at my food. Like, for good. Jack leaned back, sipping his coffee. Thought about it plenty. But running doesn't solve anything. You just take your problems with you. He paused, studying me. What about you, Ethan? What's got you so restless? I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. No one had ever asked me that, not Dad, not Mom, not my friends. They all assumed I was just a kid with big dreams and no plan. But Jack saw through that. He saw the part of me I'd kept locked away. The part that didn't fit in our small, conservative town. I don't know. I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't belong there. Jack didn't push, but his silence was louder than words. He paid the bill, and we stepped outside, the desert heat hitting us like a wave. The mechanic called to say the truck would be ready by evening, so we had hours to kill. Jack suggested we explore the town, but there wasn't much to see. We ended up at a small park, just a patch of grass with a rickety bench. We sat, the silence stretching again. I could feel Jack's presence beside me, solid and warm, like an anchor in a storm I hadn't named yet. You ever feel something you weren't supposed to? I asked, my voice shaking. Jack turned to me, his expression unreadable. Yeah, he said softly. More than you know. My heart pounded. I wanted to ask what he meant, to spill everything I'd been holding back. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked away, focusing on a lizard darting across the dirt. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Small talk, a walk to a nearby creek, Jack pointing out constellations as the sun set. Each moment felt charged, like we were circling something neither of us was ready to name. By the time we got the truck back, the sky was dark, and I felt different, not fixed, but less alone. As we climbed into the truck, Jack turned to me. Whatever you're carrying, Ethan, you don't have to carry it alone. His words settled into me, heavy and warm, like a promise. We drove into the night, the festival still ahead, but I wasn't thinking about music anymore. I was thinking about Jack, about the way his voice steadied me, about the possibility that I could be more than my fears. For the first time, I felt like I might find my way not to Arizona, but to myself. The highway hummed beneath the truck's tires, a steady rhythm that matched the unease in my chest. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit desert. I kept stealing glances at him, wondering how he could be so calm when everything inside me felt like it was unraveling. We were back on the road, the festival still a day away, but the air between us had changed. His words from yesterday, "You don't have to carry it alone," echoed in my mind, daring me to speak, to ask the questions I'd buried for years. But every time I opened my mouth, fear clamped it shut. Jack broke the silence first. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his eyes flicking toward me. "Something on your mind?" I shrugged, staring out the window at the endless stretch of sand and stars. "Just tired," I lied. He didn't buy it. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened, like he was weighing whether to push or let it go. He chose the latter, and I hated how much I wished he hadn't. We stopped at a roadside motel, a neon sign flickering vacancy in pink and blue. The clerk handed us a key to a room with 2 beds, and I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Jack tossed his bag on one bed, and I claimed the other, the space between us feeling wider than the desert outside. In the dim light of the room, I watched him unpack a spare shirt, a toothbrush, a worn paperback novel. Everything about him was deliberate, unhurried, like he'd made peace with the world's chaos. I wanted that peace, but I didn't know how to reach for it. You ever been in love? I blurted out, the question surprising us both. My face burned, but I couldn't take it back. Jack paused, his hands stilling on his bag. He sat on the edge of his bed, facing me, his expression soft but guarded. Once, he said, a long time ago. What happened? I asked, my voice barely steady. He looked down at his hands, his fingers tracing the calluses on his palms. Didn't work out. He wasn't ready. Neither was I guess. My breath caught. The word hit like a lightning bolt, cracking open something inside me. Jack was, like me. I stared at him, searching his face for answers. But he didn't meet my eyes. I didn't know, I said, my voice small. Not many people do. He replied, his tone matter of fact but tinged with something heavier. It's not something I advertise. Not in our town. Our town. The place where I'd grown up hearing slurs tossed around like jokes. Where being different felt like a crime. Jack had lived there for years, carrying that secret, and I'd never suspected. Suddenly, his calmness, his confidence, felt like armor built from years of surviving. Why'd you stay? I asked. Why not leave? He leaned back, his eyes finally meeting mine. Because running doesn't change who you are? And I like who I am. Ethan. Took me a long time to get there. But I do. His words landed like a punch. Not painful but powerful. I wanted to believe I could feel that way too. But doubt clung to me like damp clothes. What if I don't know who I am? I said, my voice breaking. Jack's gaze softened. Then you keep looking. And you don't let anyone tell you who you're supposed to be. The room felt smaller, the air thick with everything unsaid. I wanted to tell him everything about the crush I'd had on my high school teammate, about the nights I'd spent scrolling forums, trying to understand myself, about the fear that kept me silent. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, we talked about other things: music, movies, the festival. Jack told me about the first concert he'd ever been to, a punk show in the 90s, and I laughed for the first time in days. His stories were a lifeline, pulling me out of my head and into the moment. When we finally turned out the lights, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Jack's breathing was steady across the room, a rhythm that grounded me. I thought about his life, about the man he'd loved, about the courage it took to be himself in a world that didn't always make space for him. The next morning, we hit the road again, the festival closer now. Jack turned on the radio, and a soft indie song filled the truck. I watched him hum along, his fingers tapping the wheel, and felt a warmth I couldn't name. It wasn't just attraction, though I couldn't deny that was there. It was something deeper, a connection I hadn't expected. As we drove, Jack pointed out a roadside stand selling homemade tamales. We stopped, ate in the truck, and laughed about the sauce dripping on our shirts. For a moment, I forgot about the weight I carried. I was just Ethan, eating tamales with Jack, chasing a horizon that felt a little less out of reach. But the closer we got to the festival, the more I realized I wasn't ready for it. Not the crowds, not the noise, not the pressure to be someone I hadn't figured out yet. Jack seemed to sense it. We don't have to go, he said, his voice gentle. We can turn around, find somewhere else to be. I looked at him, my heart racing. Where would we go? He smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Anywhere you want. Ethan. Anywhere that feels right. The festival was supposed to be my escape. My chance to drown out the noise in my head with music and freedom. But as we neared the Arizona border, the idea of crowds and chaos felt like a cage, not a release. Jack's offer to turn around lingered, tempting me to choose a different path, one I didn't fully understand yet. We pulled into a gas station, the neon lights buzzing in the twilight. Jack filled the tank while I leaned against the truck, staring at the horizon where the desert met the sky. What's it gonna be, Ethan? He asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. Festival or something else? I hesitated, my fingers tracing the chipped paint on the truck. What's something else look like? He grinned, a spark in his eyes. Could be a quiet spot by a lake. Could be a dive bar with a jukebox. Could be just you and me, figuring things out. His words hung in the air, simple but loaded, and my stomach flipped. Let's skip the festival, I said, surprising myself. Let's figure things out. Jack nodded, like he'd known my answer all along. We climbed back into the truck, and he turned us away from the festival, heading toward a national park he'd mentioned earlier. There's a place up in the mountains, he said. Quiet. Nobody around. You'll like it. The drive was different now, the tension between us softer, like we'd crossed an invisible line. Jack told me about the park hidden trails, a lake that glowed under the stars. His voice was a steady hum, calming the storm inside me. I didn't know what I was running toward, but for the first time, I wasn't running away. We reached the park as the sun dipped below the peaks, casting everything in gold. Jack led us to a secluded campsite by a small lake, the water so still it mirrored the sky. We set up camp, Jack building a fire, me unpacking the gear. It felt natural, like we'd done this 100 times. As the fire crackled, we sat on a log, sharing a thermos of coffee. The stars were brighter here, sharper, like they were watching us. I felt exposed, but not in a bad way. Jack's presence made it okay to be seen. You ever tell anyone? I asked, my voice barely above the fire's snap. About, you know. Jack poked at the flames with a stick, his face thoughtful. A few people. My sister. A couple of close friends. Never your dad. He paused, glancing at me. It's not about shame. It's about survival. You pick your battles. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. I've never told anyone, I admitted. Not even myself. Really? He didn't respond right away. Just let the silence hold space for my words. Then he said, first time I admitted it, I was about your age. Felt like the world was going to end. But it didn't. It got better. Better how? I asked, desperate for something to hold on to. He smiled, the firelight catching the lines on his face. I stopped hating myself. Started living instead of hiding. His words cut deep, stirring something I'd buried under years of fear. I wanted to live without the constant weight of pretending. But the thought of saying it out loud, of claiming that part of myself, terrified me. Jack seemed to sense it. He reached over, his hand resting on my shoulder, warm and steady. You don't have to have it all figured out tonight, he said. Just take it one step at a time. I looked at him, his face half-shadowed, and felt a pull I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just gratitude or admiration. It was something raw, something that made my pulse race and my hands tremble. I wanted to lean closer, to close the gap between us. But fear held me back. Instead, I asked about his life, more stories, more pieces of who he was. He told me about the man he'd loved, a musician who'd broken his heart in San Francisco. He talked about the years he spent rebuilding himself, finding peace in small things like fixing cars and hiking trails. Each story was a window into a life I wanted to understand, a life I wanted to imagine for myself. The fire died down, and we crawled into our sleeping bags, the lake reflecting the stars above us. I lay awake, listening to Jack's breathing, feeling the weight of his words. He hadn't pushed me to confess, hadn't forced me to name what I was feeling, but he'd given me something better, a map to follow, a promise that I could find my way. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized I wasn't just falling for Jack. I was falling for the idea of being free, of being me, without apology. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to keep driving. The morning sun filtered through the pines, painting the lake in shades of amber. I woke to the sound of Jack splashing water on his face, his shirt tossed over a branch, his skin catching the light. My breath hitched, and I looked away, my face hot with something I wasn't ready to name. We ate a quick breakfast, granola bars, and instant coffee before Jack suggested a hike. "There's a trail up the ridge," he said, pointing to a path winding through the trees. "View's worth it." I agreed, eager for anything to distract me from the thoughts swirling in my head. The trail was steep, the air thin, but Jack moved with ease, his steps sure on the rocky path. I lagged behind, my mind replaying last night's conversation. He'd been so open, so unafraid to share his truth. I envied that, but I also feared it. What would it cost me to be that honest? Halfway up, we stopped at a lookout, the valley sprawling below us. Jack handed me his water bottle, our fingers brushing. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through me, sharp and undeniable. I mumbled a thanks and looked away, pretending to study the horizon. "You're thinking too hard," Jack said, his voice teasing but kind. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I swallowed, my throat dry despite the water. "Just wondering what happens when we go back home." He sat on a boulder, his eyes scanning the valley. "Home doesn't have to be a cage, Ethan. You get to decide what it means." His words were simple, but they hit hard. Home was where I'd learned to hide, to shrink myself to fit my dad's expectations, my town's rules. But Jack made it sound possible to change that, to carve out a space where I could be me. We kept hiking, the trail growing narrower, the air cooler. Jack talked about his life, how he'd found balance, how he'd learned to live authentically without shouting it to the world. "It's not about being loud," he said. "It's about being true." I wanted to ask how he did it, how he faced the judgment, the whispers. But instead, I asked, "You ever regret it? Telling people?" He paused, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes. Not because I'm ashamed, but because it changes things. People look at you differently. Some pull away." I nodded, thinking of my dad, my friends, the life I'd built on lies. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I admitted. Jack stopped walking, turning to face me. "You don't have to be ready today or tomorrow. But when you are, it's like breathing for the first time." His words hung in the air, and I felt that pull again, stronger now. I wanted to step closer, to tell him how much he was changing me, but fear kept me rooted. Instead, we kept moving, reaching the ridge just as the sun hit its peak. The view was breathtaking, mountains rolling into the distance. The lake a sapphire below. Jack stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm. "Worth it, right?" he said, grinning. "Yeah," I said, but I wasn't looking at the view. I was looking at him, at the way his eyes lit up, at the strength in his quiet presence. For the first time, I let myself imagine what it would be like to stop hiding, to let someone see me the way Jack did. We spent the afternoon exploring, finding a hidden waterfall that sprayed mist across our faces. Jack laughed, shaking water from his hair, and I felt something loosen inside me. I was starting to see him not just as my dad's friend, but as someone who understood me in a way no one else ever had. As we hiked back to camp, the sun setting behind us, I felt bolder. "Jack," I said, my voice steady for once. "What if I'm like you?" He stopped, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, I thought I'd crossed a line, but then he smiled, soft and real. "Then you're already braver than you think, Ethan." That night, we sat by the fire again, the stars brighter than ever. I told him about my high school crush, about the shame that had kept me silent. He listened, never judging, never interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You're not alone in this. You never were." I went to bed with his words in my heart, feeling lighter than I had in years. Jack wasn't just guiding me through the desert, was guiding me toward myself. And for the first time, I believed I could get there. The campfire's embers glowed faintly as dawn crept over the mountains, casting a soft light on Jack's sleeping bag. I lay awake, my mind a tangle of hope and fear. Yesterday's confession admitting I might be like him had left me raw, exposed, but also strangely free. Jack stirred, sitting up and stretching, his shirt rumpled from sleep. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. "Sleep okay?" "Not really," I admitted, managing a small smile. He didn't press, just started brewing coffee over the fire, the routine grounding us both. We decided to stay at the campsite another day, neither of us eager to return to the real world. Jack suggested fishing in the lake, and I agreed, mostly because I wanted to stay close to him. We grabbed rods from the truck and set up on the shore, the water lapping gently against the rocks. Fishing was quiet, peaceful, but my thoughts were loud. I kept replaying our conversations, the way Jack's eyes softened when he talked about his past, the way his hand on my shoulder felt like an anchor. I wanted to ask him so much how he knew for sure, how he found the courage to live openly, but every question felt like a step closer to a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. "You're doing it again," Jack said, reeling in his line. "Thinking too hard." I laughed, caught off guard. "Can't help it." He set his rod down, leaning back on his hands. "Try me. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, then took a breath. "How did you know? Like, for sure." He looked out at the lake, his expression distant but not closed off. "It wasn't one moment," he said. "It was a lot of little ones. Moments when I couldn't deny how I felt, no matter how hard I tried. Like when I met him, the guy I told you about. It wasn't just love. It was truth." My heart pounded. What if I'm not ready to know my truth? Jack turned to me, his gaze steady. "Then you wait. But don't hide from it, Ethan. It'll find you eventually." His words settled into me, heavy but not crushing. We fished in silence for a while, the lake reflecting the sky's shifting colors. I didn't catch anything, but it didn't matter. Being there with Jack, feeling seen, was enough. Later, we hiked to a nearby cliff, the view even more stunning than the ridge. Jack pointed out a hawk circling above, and we watched it soar, free and unburdened. I envied that freedom, but for the first time, I felt it might be within reach. As we sat on the cliff's edge, our legs dangling over the drop, I felt bold again. "Jack," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I think I'm gay." The words hung in the air, raw and real. I braced for the world to crack open, but it didn't. Jack just nodded, his expression calm but warm. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That's a big step." Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. I'd said it out loud, and the world hadn't ended. Jack didn't look at me like I was broken or wrong. He looked at me like I was enough. We talked for hours about his coming out, about the people who'd stood by him and the ones who hadn't. He told me about the fear, the joy, the messy beauty of living authentically. I hung on every word, feeling like I was seeing a future I could actually want. That night, back at the campsite, we cooked hot dogs over the fire, the flames casting shadows on Jack's face. I felt different, lighter, braver. I caught myself staring at him, at the way his laugh lines deepened, at the strength in his hands. The pull was stronger now, undeniable, but I didn't know what to do with it. As we cleaned up, our hands brushed while passing a plate, and I didn't pull away. Neither did he. The moment lingered, charged, until Jack broke it with a soft chuckle. "You're gonna be okay, Ethan," he said, his voice low. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I could face my dad, my town, my own doubts. But more than that, I wanted to know what it would feel like to be closer to Jack, to let myself feel what I'd been fighting for so long. As we lay in our sleeping bags, the stars blazing above, I felt a shift. I wasn't just stranded with my dad's friend anymore. I was on a journey with someone who saw me, who made me believe I could be whole. And that was more terrifying and more beautiful than anything I'd ever known. The lake was a mirror of the morning sky, calm and endless. But inside me, a storm was brewing. Saying the word gay out loud yesterday had cracked something open, and now I couldn't stop the feelings rushing in. Jack was still Jack, steady, kind, my dad's friend, but he was also something else. Something that made my heart race every time he looked at me. We packed up camp slowly, neither of us in a hurry to leave this bubble we'd created. Jack suggested one last hike before heading home, and I agreed, desperate to hold on to this feeling a little longer. The trail wound through a forest, the air thick with pine and possibility. As we walked, Jack talked about his plans, fixing up his old motorcycle, maybe taking a trip to the coast. I listened, but my mind was elsewhere, caught on the way his voice softened when he said my name, the way his hand had lingered on mine last night. I wanted to ask if he felt it too, this pull between us, but the words felt too big, too dangerous. We reached a clearing, a meadow bursting with wildflowers. Jack stopped, picking a small purple bloom and twirling it between his fingers. "Reminds me of you," he said, half smiling. "Looks delicate, but it's tougher than it seems." My face burned, but I laughed, trying to play it cool. "You calling me delicate?" He grinned, tucking the flower behind my ear. "Nah. Just saying you're stronger than you think." His fingers brushed my cheek, and I froze, every nerve alive. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken things. until Jack stepped back, clearing his throat. We kept walking, but the air felt different now, charged with something neither of us acknowledged. I wanted to grab his hand, to tell him I wasn't just grateful I was falling for him. But he was my dad's friend, twice my age, and I didn't know if what I felt was real or just a desperate need for someone to understand me. Back at the truck, we loaded our gear, the real world creeping closer. Jack turned to me, his expression serious. "Ethan, when we get back, things might get hard. People talk. Your dad, he might not get it right away." I nodded, my stomach twisting. "I know, but I don't want to hide anymore." He smiled, pride flickering in his eyes. "That's my boy." The words hit me hard, not because they were patronizing, but because they felt like a promissory claim that I belonged somewhere, even if it was just with him. The drive home was quiet, the desert giving way to familiar roads. I kept stealing glances at Jack, memorizing the lines of his face, the way his hands gripped the wheel. I wanted to tell him how much he'd changed me, how he'd given me the courage to face myself. But every time I tried, my throat closed up. We stopped at a diner for lunch, the same one we'd hit on the way out. Jack teased me about my ketchup-stained shirt, and I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. But as we ate, I noticed his gaze linger, his eyes searching mine like he was looking for something. "Jack," I said, my voice low, "do you ever feel something for someone you shouldn't?" He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. For a moment, I thought I'd ruined everything. But then he set the fork down, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said quietly. "More than I should." My heart stopped. Was he talking about me? I wanted to ask, to push, but the diner was too public, the moment too fragile. Instead, I changed the subject, talking about the weather, the road, anything to keep from falling apart. As we drove the final stretch home, the tension grew thicker. I knew what was coming facing my dad, my town, my truth. But I also knew I wasn't alone. Jack had shown me that. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked smaller, like it couldn't contain the person I was becoming. Jack turned off the engine, turning to me. "You're going to be okay, Ethan," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm here. Whatever happens." I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "Thanks, Jack, for everything." He reached over, squeezing my shoulder, and I felt that pull again, stronger than ever. I wanted to lean in, to close the distance. But my dad's car was in the driveway, and the world was watching. As I grabbed my bag and stepped out, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a life I was finally ready to claim, and of something between me and Jack that I wasn't ready to let go of. The porch light flickered as I walked up to the house, my bag heavy on my shoulder, Jack's truck idling behind me. I turned back, catching his silhouette in the driver's seat, and felt a pang I couldn't name. This trip had changed me, and what Jack did that night seeing me, really seeing me, had set me on a path I couldn't turn back from. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and familiarity, but it felt foreign, like I was a stranger in my own life. Dad was in the living room, watching a game, his eyes flicking to me as I dropped my bag. "Have fun?" he asked, his tone casual but expectant. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. It was different. He nodded, turning back to the TV, and I realized he didn't see it shift in me, the truth I was carrying. I wanted to tell him, to spill everything, But the word stuck. Not yet. Over the next few days, I felt like I was living in two worlds. At home, I was still Ethan, the kid who mowed the lawn and avoided Dad's questions about college. But in my head, I was the Ethan who'd sat by a lake with Jack, who'd said, "I'm gay," out loud and felt the world keep turning. Jack and I texted. Small things at first, jokes about the diner, plans to fix the truck. But each message felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. One night, he invited me over to his garage, saying he needed help with a project. I went, my heart racing, unsure what I was hoping for. The garage smelled of oil and sawdust, Jack's motorcycle gleaming in the corner. He handed me a wrench, his fingers brushing mine, and I felt that pull again, stronger now. We worked in silence, the clank of tools filling the space, but the air was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Jack," I said, setting the wrench down, "what are we doing?" He looked at me, his eyes searching. "What do you mean?" I took a breath, my hands trembling. "This. Us. I feel something. For you." The words were out, raw and reckless, and I braced for rejection. Jack's face softened, but there was pain there too. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "you're young. You're just starting to figure yourself out. I'm your dad's friend." "I know," I said, stepping closer. "But that doesn't change how I feel." He ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn. "I feel it too," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's complicated. You've got a whole life ahead of you. I don't want to hold you back." "You're not," I said, my voice fierce. "You're the one who showed me I could live that life." For a moment, we just stood there, the distance between us shrinking. Then he reached out, pulling me into a hug, his arms strong and warm. It wasn't a kiss, wasn't a confession, but it was enough a promise that he saw me, that he cared. We didn't cross that line. Not then. But we kept talking, kept meeting coffee runs, late-night drives, moments that felt like ours alone. Jack became my anchor, my guide, as I started to come out to others. I told my best friend first, then my sister, each confession making me braver. When I finally told my dad, it was messy tears, confusion, a long silence. But Jack was there, not as my dad's friend, but as mine, helping me navigate the fallout. Dad didn't understand. Not fully. But he didn't push me away either. It was a start. Months later, I stood in Jack's garage again. The motorcycle finally finished. He handed me a helmet, grinning, ready for a ride. I laughed, climbing on behind him, my arms wrapping around his waist. As we sped down the highway, the wind roaring in my ears, I felt free not just from my town, my fears, but from the weight of hiding. Jack hadn't just changed me that night in the desert. He'd shown me how to live as myself, unapologetically. The road stretched ahead, endless and open, and I knew, no matter where it led, I'd carry this journey with me. Jack wasn't mine, not in the way I'd once hoped, but he'd given me something better, the courage to be me, and the strength to keep going.